Hi, everybody. This is Strategic Internet Public Relations. It's week 2, and we're Zooming, and we've got some great guests. We got Virginia, and we got Kara. So, and I just asked everybody, by the way, if you see me freeze, my camera's dying, and I've got a new computer on order, but it won't be until sometime after school gets opened back up again. They already replaced it once last year. I really used my camera a lot. Anyway, my question is, what were your thoughts on week 1? What challenges did you have? What questions? Anything like that?
I don't think I had any challenges. I did like that you gave us like a lot of resources and reading material, so that was great. Other than that, yeah, I don't have any really questions as far as for this week. My questions are more so for the group project that we're doing. So that's where I'm a little concerned. Just because like we're working in our group and we're just trying to, brainstorm, come together. And of course, it's a little more challenging because we're virtual and, we have other stuff that we're doing. So we're just trying to, work around everyone's schedule, and make sure we're all contributing and we're all like, coming together to come up with solutions. Oh, hi, Cara.
Hi.
So I just wanted to make sure that we're kind of on the right, making the right strides in the right direction. So for our particular group, we were looking at like how the pandemic is affecting like the entertainment industry. That's something that we have been looking at, and we were just trying to see what would be the best way to approach it. If we should focus on like more so like one organization and then just come up with solutions and just do it together. Because at first we were all looking at like different industries. So, and then we realized like, okay, so we probably should do it like one industry, one company, and then just come together and combine our information. So we were just trying to see if we can get kind of like a little more information as to like,
You bring up a great point with regard to so it's a crisis project. And now let me tell you something about public relations. Public relations and organizational communications are like they're a fist, right? One side is corporate communications, one side is public relations. And so companies and business oftentimes have to weather change events. Now, a change event can be when the company internally looks at things and says, we're going to change because of, and a lot of times it can be as simple as there's a new CEO and they're changing direction and whatnot. Other times a company has to go through change because it's imposed upon them. And it comes from the outside, it gobsmacks them on the side of the head. And then they have to deal with it. But that's a change event versus a crisis. And let me try and tell you what a crisis is. And the best example I can give you, because it is the benchmark of how a crisis should be handled in a company, even though it goes way back, goes back to the 80s. Johnson & Johnson, they're the makers of Tylenol and Advil. Somebody was opening up bottles of Tylenol and injecting cyanide into the capsules. And people were literally dying. People would buy Tylenol, they take one pill and what they say in the spy movies, take the cyanide capsule. You put cyanide inside your mouth and you're dead within seconds. And people were dropping left and right. And so what ended up happening was Johnson & Johnson had to respond because this was a crisis of momentous proportion. It was affecting the brand, both short term and long term. I mean, if you're taking medicine from somebody, or even food for that matter, there's got to be a certain amount of trust that you're not going to die from whatever you're taking. And so this was a huge, momentous crisis. And how Johnson & Johnson handled it was absolutely remarkable. And it stands the test of time, as today it is the benchmark for how businesses should handle crises. So similar, because a crisis, part of the way that we define crisis is gobsmacks the business. They're not expecting it. And all of a sudden it keeps growing and growing. It has legs of its own. But the difference is that with a change event, and COVID-19 is a change event. It's a big, big change event. And it's going to have public relations implications, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But in terms of a crisis, it doesn't really meet the formula for a crisis in a company, because it's not something that was either done to them specifically or they did themselves specifically. But let me show you where they intersect. Did you hear the stories of 3M? 3M was making N95 masks. And
No.
they decided that they were going to ship N95 masks to their foreign customers before they took care of the folks here in the United States. And what happened, so now, put yourself in the part of 3M. 3M is saying first in, first out in terms of orders. I had these orders first, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It might be the case that those that are paying the most are going to get the mask first. That could have been the case, but either way, they were sending the masks out. Now, to their audience / stakeholders, that looked absolutely horrible. And all of a sudden, the opinion and the trust that people had in 3M took a nosedive. And so, based on what the actions that 3M took, created a public trust crisis, and that's a PR crisis. So it was related to COVID-19, but it wasn't COVID-19 together. Now, let me talk about COVID-19 for a moment. COVID-19, like I said, is a change. It's a change event. And public relations and marketing efforts are going to be very, very intense going forward, because businesses are going to have to communicate. You're going to say, wait a minute, this is just like Johnson & Johnson. Businesses are going to have to communicate why people can trust their business and not worry about dying. Okay?
Right.
So as the country starts to open back up, Kara, what part of the country are you in?
I'm in California.
Okay. So California is starting to open back up. Florida is starting to open back up. And you're going to see where there's a certain part of the population, they are just going to rush right out and take advantage of restaurants being open and so forth. And that's about a third of the population, because they're early adapters. Then there's going to be about a third of the population that sits back and says, I ain't going anywhere until I see whether or not you die. I'm going to make sure you don't get COVID-19 and that we can be okay. And so you've got the second group that's waiting. So I said thirds. So then there's a third group, and that third group, I don't think they're going to move until we start talking about very effective therapeutics like the remdesivir or the hydrochloroquine, and there's a couple other medicines out there that they're evaluating. I don't think that last group is going to move until they know that's available and it's working. So from a messaging standpoint, there's similarities. We've got to convey trust that you're not going to die, which is what Johnson & Johnson had to do back in the 1980s. They had to convey to their publics, to their audiences, to their stakeholders that they weren't going, that if you bought Tylenol or Advil, you weren't going to die. So what did they do? Well, first off, as a company, they assumed responsibility. They said, this is our product. You're our customers. We apologize. We should have been better. We should have not allowed this to happen. So then what did they do? Well, they started to change the product and the manufacturing process. You don't see capsules very often on mass market over-the-counter pharmaceuticals anymore. What you see are caplets, right? They're pills, but they're shaped like a capsule. And that's because you can't inject them with anything. And so the introduction of caplets to replace capsules was an innovation that came, and the reason for capsules, I don't know if you probably know this, but some people can't swallow a pill. And so capsules are much easier to swallow because of their shape and all. So it's important to have medicine that's available as a capsule. So Johnson & Johnson, they made these caplets, which were pills but shaped like a capsule that you couldn't inject anything in. That was the first thing they changed. And then the second thing they changed, and everybody just loves this.
Okay.
They made tamper-proof packaging. It's impossible. Try to open up a brand new bottle of Advil or whatnot, or Tylenol. It's frustrating sometimes. It's so tough to get into. But those were all changes that were made as a result of the cyanide poisoning that was Johnson & Johnson. Well, the other thing that Johnson & Johnson did too, they pulled, excuse me. It's a good thing we're social distancing because I think I've got a sneeze coming. I did have a sneeze coming. The other thing that Johnson & Johnson did was they pulled all the product off their shelves. So they said, we don't trust the product that's there now, and we're just going to trash it. So imagine all around the globe, they pulled and trashed all their over-the-counter pain pills. And then they started fresh. So, and I mean, it's kind of almost what we've done with COVID as a globe. Everybody shut down. The idea being to flatten the curve, but to get rid of the problem as much as possible, and then start to come back and open up with maybe new guidelines and safety protocols and all, so that you feel safe, that there's a level of trust when you go to particularly a location-based business. Here in Central Florida, I think we're about to see one of the biggest miracles I think you'll ever see, which is that when Walt Disney World opens back up, most people don't realize, but Walt Disney World is the single largest employer, single site. So Lake Buena Vista, Florida, Walt Disney World has more employees that work there than any other company, any other site anywhere in the world. Now, that may have changed with Foxconn. You know who Foxconn is? Foxconn is the Chinese manufacturer of iPhones.
No.
And I think they may have more people in their factories than Disney, but very for sure everywhere else, and definitely in the United States, Walt Disney World, single site, largest employer in that you'll ever find. Over 100,000 people work at Walt Disney World. And first they were all sent home with pay, and then they were furloughed. And now they're going to have to bring them back and get back open. So that's going to be quite a challenge. So I know you missed a good part of that, Virginia, with regard to that whole discussion. I think what you mostly missed was when I was talking about what happened to Johnson & Johnson and what they did. But let me just summarize by saying that a change event and a crisis are similar, but they're different, and they're different because one affects the trust and the relationship of a specific company, and a change event affects change across a broad spectrum. Okay. So let me.
So, I have another.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was reading an article about Amazon, and they were just talking about how some of their delivery drivers were basically like tampering with the packages. So they were like spitting on them or like doing, pretty much inappropriate things with people's packages. So would that be considered in just an issue, or would that be like a crisis? Because it does damage their reputation. So what would that be?
It's actually a matter of opinion, or a fine line between an issue and a crisis. Typically, a crisis is an issue that the company loses control of in terms of the messaging. So if the messaging is if the reporting on it starts to run away and everybody's talking about it, now you've got a crisis. All right. But that line, it's a matter of opinion. I haven't heard anything directly, but I'll be honest with you. I've been buried lately with work. So I haven't been, I'm either listening during March and April. The only news I really took in was the presidential press conferences. One, because that's part of public relations, and I felt it had national impact. But other than that, I have been so focused on various work projects that I haven't seen the Amazon issue boil up. But boy, I'll tell you what, that has the potential. So I'm not hypercritical if you say something's a crisis. If you can make your argument that it's a crisis, I'm game. I'm not going to split hairs. I don't have that many left, so I don't split hairs. Now that was a joke. That's about as funny as I get. So if you guys aren't laughing,
I gave you a chuckle. I got a chuckle.
Okay, I'll take it. And there, I see Kara smiling, so I'm good. I'm good. So this, though, brings us to another point, which is the whole point of this week. And this week is all about trustworthy events. And what we're doing with trustworthy events is we are, it's kind of wild. We're actually you're going to learn how to take a trustworthy event and why a trustworthy event is so important, and and how, and from the public relations standpoint, we build it into something. So give me just a moment. I want to make sure. I thought I had a, oh Lord. Sometimes my notes just don't pop up when I want them to. Well, I'll tell you what, it's interesting. I have trustworthy as a keyword for my page with the notes on it, and it's not coming up at all right at the moment. I keep looking to see if I'm spelling trustworthy right. Let's do this. Jeez. All right. I'm just going to play it by ear. Give me just 1 second. I got to apologize. I've got my 15-year-old dachshund in the room with me. He doesn't walk anymore, and he's starting to cry. So I'm going to take him over to my wife's office and see if she can take care of him for a few moments. I'll be right back. Just take me a second.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'll be right back.
How's everything going?
Hi, Virginia.
Hi.
Not
How's
bad.
everything
Not bad.
going?
What about you?
Good. I just came from Trader Joe's.
Here we
So
go. Sorry about that.
that's about it.
Oh.
That's it.
So you can tell I'm wearing my fancy professorial
It's okay.
attire, which these days is really my workout clothes from the morning. All right, so
Same here.
Let's talk about public relations for a moment, and go back and just briefly talk about what you did last week. Last week, from the discussion standpoint, we had you start to look at frames of mind, global perspectives, worldviews. And that's important, and that's where you get your code of ethics and all from. That's important to understand because, and I think I challenged you, if you watch the Zoom, I challenged you to go out and do some research on postmodernism and critical theory. Those are worldviews. Not everybody espouses them, but they're dominant in terms of the global business environment. And in particular, they're important because they affect the way the media reacts. And as we talked about with regard to, whether or not the media is going to take an item like Amazon and how well they're going to communicate it, that part of that we have to understand how they're thinking and what they're looking at. So developing an understanding of postmodernism and critical theory. And I won't, in our class, I won't take you through the entire history, but I do have lectures from another class that's basically titled France is the root of all evil. And I take a look at history going all the way back to right before, well, about 150 years before the French Revolution, and then coming up to modern history, because that's really where a lot of modern thinking came from. But what I want you to know about all that is that it's important, and here's why. We just talked about Johnson & Johnson and Tylenol, and we defined a crisis, okay, as where people were dying because of their product. Up until just recently, and two examples that I'll give you as far as recent that don't meet the model. One is Boeing and their 737 aircraft, and the other is everything that's going on right now with COVID. But up until now, a crisis has not been defined by people dying. A crisis has been defined by when somebody's upset. I'll give you an example. I think it was a year or two ago. Remember the guy that was on the United Airlines flight, and the flight was booked solid. United was asking for volunteers to leave so that they could put some flight crew on that needed to get to another airport to fly a plane. And they started removing people without them volunteering, saying, we're bumping you to another flight. And some guy, he took exception to that, didn't want to leave, and they ended up having to call in the airport police, and they drug him, and there was tons of, oh my God, cell phone video. Two words if you're in public relations and you're working for a company that you don't want to hear: cell phone video, right? Mm-hmm. And they drug him off. And here's a story that just spiraled out of control, because every opportunity that the company had to put an end to it and say, hey, we apologize, we were wrong, we shouldn't have done it, stop, we'll make it right. At any point they could have done that, but no, they kept justifying why they did it. Think about how big of a deal was this, really, when you get down to it? I don't know about you, but when I used to fly a lot, if there was an opportunity to be bumped off, I always took it, because it always meant a free ticket. They'd get me where I was going plus a free ticket, and a lot of times they put me in first class too.
Right.
So I used to love to do that stuff, but all they had to do, a manager at the airport, a manager from corporate, or even the CEO, who stepped in it numerous times, had they just said, we were wrong, we shouldn't have dealt with it this way, we apologize, we'll make it right. And that would have been the end of it.
Yeah.
But again, think about it. People's feelings were hurt. It was really about the person saying, why are you picking on me? And then we have a crisis. So that's the difference where we've been for most of the time. Now, Boeing has had a crisis. What do you know what's going on with Boeing?
No, I haven't heard anything.
Boeing, over the last couple of years, when they introduced the new version of the 737, I think they call it the Dreamliner, the autopilot features and the transition from off of autopilot, kind of tricky. And evidently, they just sold it without telling anybody that there was this change. And so there's probably been at least 2, maybe 3 crashes of Boeing jet, none of them in the United States, but around the world where the jet went down, and because it's a U.S. company, the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and the National Transportation Safety Board, they always send investigators, because it's a U.S. company, to figure out what happened to the plane. They've ultimately discovered that it was this issue, and it was an issue with some customers because they were provided the instruction manual. Stupid. And other customers, I guess they didn't pay enough to buy the instruction manual. And so the Boeing actually had to ground the entire fleet of 737s worldwide until they could implement some software changes to make the planes easier to operate and safer to operate. But that's the first time that we've had a crisis where lives were at stake in quite a while. Now, of course, with COVID, and it's interesting. Nobody really knows just how deadly this is. What is the true mortality rate? It might be exactly what they're saying, or it might be a little bit more than what we see with regard to flus. I have a friend that's a doctor. He's not a virologist, but he is a medical doctor that's studying this, because he's studying it from a radiological graph standpoint. He's a radiologist, and he tells me that this is a bad bug, and what he's looking at and the information that he sees, he says that he believes it was engineered. He believes it's that the bug was designed to have what's called gain of function. So, but we don't know what that means. But bottom line, everything around this, the threat of death is there. So whether the mortality rate is as high as it is, or they say, or if it's lower, we don't know. But there's the threat. And so COVID-19 has created some interesting scenarios, such as the 3M masks. And what the real message with 3M was, by diverting those masks to other countries, 3M, you were causing Americans to lose their life. And so we've come full circle back from 1982 with Johnson & Johnson to 2020, where public relations events or crises have a mortality associated with them. And we haven't seen that in a number of years. So I think what's interesting is that public relations crises going forward are going to be less about feelings and emotions and going to be more about physical danger. I think is the reading the tea leaves in terms of what I would call a sea change in terms of public relations. Sea change meaning the way the tide has changed, and we're seeing something significantly different. Whew. That was a lot of talking. Am I putting you to sleep?
No, it's good information.
No.
Okay. So now let me tell you a little bit more about, just in general, about a case study. Any case study, you're never going to have you can do all the research that you want, but you're never going to be able to get all your answers from the research. And that's by design. So that means that you have to start connecting the dots and coming up with solutions. When I was an MBA student, I was in an executive MBA program, and our program was designed around case studies. And we had, I think my entire MBA was like a 36 or 38 month program. It might have been 42 actually, 42 months now that I think about it. And we had to, we did a lot of case studies, and we had to present our findings. Well, when we realized this, what my learning team, my group did, and I only had, through my entire program, I only had 2 different learning teams, 2 different study groups. We fictitiously made ourselves a consulting company. So we were Rosencrantz and Guildenstern LLC consultants. Now, and this is just a total aside, you may find it funny, you may not, but the way I amused myself going through my master's program was finding ways to make fun of my professors without them necessarily knowing I was making fun of them. And Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are 2 characters from Shakespeare. Did you know that?
I do now.
They are friends of Hamlet. And the King of Norway hires them to convince Hamlet not to come home. So their job is to consult Hamlet on doing something other than returning home. And because we have the play, we know that they failed. Because if Hamlet didn't come home, there wouldn't have been any play.
Right.
So we named ourselves after 2 fictitious characters. I say they were the first 2 paid consultants in history, even though they're fictitious. And what was even funnier was that they were failures. So every case study that we did, we pretended that we were consulting to the CEO, and we would make recommendations by connecting the dots on what we were learning and what we also knew about the company from our research that would be a good fit for that company. And so that was the way that we presented our information. So what I'm telling you is that you're not going to have everything you need by just research. You're going to have to make decisions and recommendations by looking at the history of your company and where it currently is, and also then taking the information that you're learning this month and applying it into that situation. Now, to give you a hint, here's what we're going to learn this month. You're learning about you learned about the importance of an ethical standard or a statement of ethics. You learned about the strategic context of a company. So its mission, its vision, its stakeholders, its competition, and all those, and its customers. You learned about how all that fits together. And then you also learn how to monitor a situation using business intelligence tools, so that you can be looking for, 1, items that you can curate, articles that you can curate for your customers, for your audience. 2, looking for possible threats in the future that you can mitigate. So crises, you want to stop a crisis before it ever comes. And finally, for ideas for things that you can do internally to create newsworthy events. So that's all what you learn in week 1. Week 2, you're learning about trustworthy events or newsworthy events. I've been saying trustworthy. I've got trust on my mind. Newsworthy events, and in addition, you're going to learn how to craft a press release. And then from that, we go to next week, where you're going to learn about distribution systems and what do you do with the press release once you write it, and how do you use it. And then finally, we take a look at measurement as well. I forget whether we're doing that in the discussion this week or I think it's a discussion in week 2. How do we measure our performance? And then in week 3, I think we look at the discussion. We look at internal communication, internal PR. So public relations within the company, which many companies, they just call executive communications, but they're one and the same, and they're related. So you want to take all those items that you learned this month and wrap that into your solution somehow for your case study company or your crisis case study. Now, the one thing that you want to do and be careful of is that don't get in the trap of just spilling the history of your company and everything that led up to the crisis. I had one group, it was a couple years ago. Their presentation was like 20 minutes. And 18 of it was telling me the history of the company.
Mm.
And I'm like,
So how long should it be? What's
well,
the
you can make a good presentation in 10 to 15 slides, I think. Okay. And it should take you somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from 6 to 12 minutes to run through that. I don't know that I put a time limit, unlike with week one. But the implication is learn from week one with your presentation and make your presentation in week four concise and to the point. If I were to throw out a recommendation, like I said, I wouldn't want to go over 15, but I'd shoot for somewhere between 6 and 12 would be the sweet spot. Okay?
Okay.
Good question. All right. Have we covered the crisis case study enough? You feel comfortable about it?
Yes, I feel like I have a better understanding of what we should look at now. Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So let's talk about week two. Let me do this. Boy, we have two big sections this month between you and new media marketing. And then I've got, I'll tell you that for the last 2 years, I've had these long-term assignments in other departments, helping them out because they like, for your mastery class in month one, I was teaching that for almost a year because they didn't have anybody that was qualified to teach the campus version. And then I got done with that, and I was teaching cultural studies on the web, which is a general ed, but it was based in marketing. And the person that had taught that wasn't qualified anymore, so I was teaching that, and I taught that for the last year. And just this month, they put me on in the entertainment business group. They asked me to teach intro to marketing, and I've actually never taught that before at this school, but I've got a lot of students in there. I've got 22 students.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay, so let me do this. And I need to come back to where you are and share my screen. Here we go. Okay, so week two, the discussion is about goals, tactics, and measurement. And there's a couple of good items you can read here. New practice number 8, master metrics, and chapter 7, and measure what matters. 7 steps to perfect measurement program, how to prove your results and use your results to improve. Now, and I thought I provided, and I didn't. So I need to get the link and send this to you. a couple years, let's go like 10 years ago in public relations, the only metric that mattered was what was called the um, uh, man, my brain just went. I think it was the add value replacement, AVR. And what it was basically saying was that what public relations people, and remember, our job, if we're wearing the public relations hat, our job is to get other people to tell our message, right? We're not the primary tellers. We're telling other people, and we want them to tell our message. So going back 10, 15 years ago, um, the AVR, the add value replacement, was if I talk to a newspaper reporter, let's say somebody from the Miami Herald, and they wrote a story about my company. Now maybe I sent a press release out, or maybe I called them on the phone, but I gave them information, and what they ended up doing was writing a story. I would take a look at how big a story it was. So if it was an eighth of a page, a quarter page, or maybe it was a feature and it was half a page, that would be, I would go to the bank inside my company and say, look, I just saved you however many tens of thousands of dollars you would spend for an ad that made up that size. And that was how public relations departments and agencies measured their worth for many, many years. Add value replacement is a down and dirty measurement. It's easy to do and it's quick. You may find that there are clients out there that still look at it, but it's not really the way that the modern practitioner handles it. About 8 years ago, the public relations industry met in Barcelona, Spain, and they came up with a new set of measurement standards, simply called the Barcelona, I think it's the Barcelona principles. And those are the principles that are now used to guide measurement with regard to public relations. So one of the things that they differentiate between is activities and outcomes. Okay, let me give you an activity. An activity is, I'm going to send out 4 press releases this month. If I do that, I've accomplished 4 activities. I sent all 4 out. That's great. Yeah. The outcome, though, what did that produce? So when you build a plan, you should, when you get to the activity level, it is something that is granular, that you're doing in order to achieve something higher. I'm going to share with you. So anyway, the initial post on this is to answer these prompts. After completing the assigned reading, think back to your previous courses where you identified goals for your company. These goals that you have already outlined will be overall business goals and paid advertising goals. Now, think about what makes public relations goals different. How can you develop goals to increase engagement, relationship, and reputation for the brand? So the outcomes that we're looking for in public relations are engagement, getting people to interact with the brand, building stronger connections, relationships, and enhancing the reputation of the brand. That's what we do in public relations. And then think about tactics. What I want to show you, and I may have given you some of this on your feedback in new media marketing, but I have been developing some better tools. Are you seeing these slides that I'm opening?
No.
No.
Here we go. So this is a new tool I developed to kind of talk about how we think about goal setting. So you have the mission and objective of a company. Now, an objective is a statement that doesn't have any numbers attached to it. It's basically saying, I'll make it an easy thing. I want to improve sales next year. Okay, so my objective is to improve sales next year. Now, the way I can make that a goal is I say, I want to improve sales by 20% next year. So a goal is taking an objective and putting a number with it. Now, you've probably in your program have had the term SMART goals hammered into your head. So a SMART goal is where we take the objective. Not only do we put the number in to quantify it, but we want to make sure that it's specific, it's measurable, it's actionable, it's relevant, and it's time bound. Okay? So when I say relevant, what I'm speaking about is it relevant to the mission of the company? Is it relevant to the top tier objective for my department? Because and I'll tell you, when I worked at Disney, I saw this a lot. My area of specialty was something called strategic alignment. So I would go into an operating area like the Animal Kingdom or downtown Disney or Disney MGM Studios, and I'd work with the vice president that was in charge, and we would take a look at all their strategic goals, and we go through and ask, how important are they and how effective are you being? And the reason we were doing that is because we wanted to see which projects they were working on that were directly tied to their top tier and the company's top tier goals. And what we find a lot of times that they were spending time and effort on projects, and they had set internal goals for things that didn't matter whatsoever. They were somebody's pet project. Most times they were the vice presidents, and so this was probably the only way that we could get rid of them, was having somebody that was an outsider like myself come in and say, nope, we can't do this. Cassie is a student in new media marketing, so that means that I'm running close to overload, so I'm going to have to begin to bring this to an end. But anyway, this diagram that I'm showing you is a way to say, how do we go from top tier item all the way down to a specific action, a tactic that we're doing, and how do they align? Okay, so in public relations, not only do we want to look at activities, but we also want to look at outcomes as well. Hi, Cassie. We're just finishing up from the last class, so you're welcome to stay, and we'll be done in just a few moments, okay?
Okay, no problem. I figured I'd come in a little bit early.
I'm glad you did.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go back, and I just want to cover. So that's what the discussion is, and I would encourage you, don't just rely on me to dig up the Barcelona. It's the Barcelona protocols. You guys should research the Barcelona protocols as well, and take a look at them. Let's go to and take a look at the press release. I just realized I've got a bad link in here, so I'm going to have to try and fix this because lynda.com, you may have to register for LinkedIn Learning. It's still the same item, but you may not be able to access it through this link. I'll take a look at it when we're done and make the change if I need to, okay? So I'm glad we looked at this page together. Anyway, you want to write a press release around a newsworthy event. And the question becomes, what's a newsworthy event? Well, the first thing to recognize is that most of the news that we watch on TV, that we see on cable, that we read in the newspaper, the vast majority, over 60% of it, originates in a press release. And so I provide you a basic format and example for a press release in here. You want to follow that. Don't get real creative, because if you're a big brand like Budweiser or General Motors or Ford, you can write your press release any way that you want. People are going to pay attention. But when you're a small company, even a middle-sized company, you got to write it the right way. And the reason being, media people are getting press releases by the billions. And the easiest way to sort things out is if it doesn't meet the regular format, I don't look at it. Now, the regular format is designed in a very specific way. So follow the information for the header and the top matter. That's very specific. Don't get creative. You want your logo, a small logo at the top. Then you have your headline. And then in your first paragraph, you want to answer the journalist 5 big questions. Have you ever heard of the journalism Big 5? You know what they are?
Who, what, when, where?
Yeah, who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Why, how?
So in that first paragraph, you want to answer all those questions. The second paragraph should be a quote from the principal, an executive from the company, the owner, the president, somebody like that. Don't make it from a customer or somebody like this. There's a place for that, but that's not here. You want the president, the vice president of marketing, somebody big that you want to get a quote from. Now, don't go looking for a quote from something that they've said before. Don't go up to somebody and say, this is what I want you to do. For every press release I've ever written, and I've written a ton, I've always written the quote. Here's what I want this person to say to support my press release. And then I say to the person, here's the press release. Is there anything you want me to change? And interestingly enough, very seldom, I have one client who's a jazz musician. Very seldom does he ever say anything about the quote. He wants to change the entire rest of the press release, but he's always okay with the quote. He's just he likes to talk and write a lot. So I give him a 1-page press release and he gives me back 3 or 4 pages. So I cut it down to 1.5 pages. He gives it back to me again at 3 pages. We usually end up somewhere close to 2, but under 2. It's just the back and forth with the client. So then after that, you can have a 3rd paragraph if there are any additional details that you want to fill in. Now, here's the important thing. Remember, you're not writing this as an advertisement. You're writing this so that somebody else can tell your story based on what you're providing. The other thing you want to include is a piece of rich media, either a high-res photo or a video or something that the person writing the story can then incorporate into their story. It's like a mini press kit. You're giving them everything that they need, making it easy for them. Now, the photo, don't use wide angle photos. You want to, whatever it is that you want to do, you want to medium close up to close up, because that tells the story. When you have a wide angle shot of something, it's useless. Nobody knows what's going on. We use wide angle in filmmaking to set the stage, but then the next shot is close up, some form of close up, a medium close up or close up itself. So you want a close up that you use as a photo. Then you provide the boilerplate, which is a very, very short paragraph about your company, and it's standardized. Then you're going to put 3 hashtags, and then there's some additional questions that you can put. Now, the 3 hashtags, and on the template I give you, it tells you what the hashtags are. Remove all that stuff. That's just template information. You just want the 3 hashtags, which to a reporter, they know, okay, that's the story up there. Now, here's some additional details I may want to be aware of. And I give you 4 questions to look at and to answer after the hashtags, okay, and start to think about. And that's important to communicate that to the reporter, because it will help them in understanding how to write the story, not just what to write. So that is your press release in a nutshell. And so I think we did good. We covered the group project in detail. We covered COVID-19 in detail. And we got you got through the assignments. So a lot of good stuff. Listen, if you have any questions, I have this window open most days, 9 to 12 and from 2 to 4. And if it's not open, just send me a text, and I can either open it or you can call me, and we can talk if you need to, okay? So my number again is 407-267-8600, and the window URL is in your discussion thread. I'll post this in the messages, and I'll also provide the link in the Zoom assignment that's up there prior to week 1. Okay?
Yes.
Hey, it was great seeing you.
It was great seeing you too. Thank you for, spending time to let us know what's going on and answer more questions, give us a little more clarity.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. It was fun. Good seeing you guys. I'll see you next week.
Okay. Have a good day, you guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Cassie, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I just had my mic muted because my daughter was kind of going through a fritz a second ago.
No worries.
I was actually able to make this one, being that I wasn't able to make the one this morning. I got home just in time.
Well, good. I got a text from Melissa saying that she had a teledoctor appointment.
Okay.
So she was not going to end up making this. It's just going to be you and me, I guess.
Okay. No problem.
So let me do this. I need to stop sharing first off. And then I need to stop the recording.